Okay. I'm going to start with this example just because I felt like it was a good way into all this. Okay, we just bought a bicycle for my wife. My wife, Wendy, is 5'6" tall. This is the Specialized Stumpjumper, their flagship mountain bike. Which size should I get her? Does anyone know? Who doesn't already know? Any ideas? It should be the S3 or the S2, I think, right? You think one of those two, S3 or S2?
Depends on what your salesman says.
Right. It depends on what salesman you've got. You know, maybe the little lady's going to want an S2, or she looks hardcore. Maybe she needs to get her an S3 or whatever. Okay. Here's their geometry for that bike. We've got a lot of numbers over here, and they relate to this. Now, Specialized, I mean, we're going to beat up on them right now, but they're not an exception, and they're not the worst when it comes to this. They just happen to be the one I'm most familiar with currently. Okay, so they have an S sizing scheme, which I actually think is a very good direction for things to move in, and various numbers here relating to stuff. Who's familiar with looking at charts like this? Okay, who looks at this chart and goes, I have no idea what you're talking about? Excellent, okay. Cool, well maybe I think after today you might have a little bit of a start. Okay, so we have stack, reach, head tube length, head tube angle, all these numbers. It's like, I don't even want to bother you with that right now. They're self-explanatory in terms of the graph, but there are problems here, and we're going to talk about the problems. Okay. Just to answer the question earlier, what size did we get Wendy, the S2 or the S3? We got her the S4, okay? And we got her the S4 because I had drawn these bikes up before buying the bike. I knew what handlebars I had available, what stems I had available, and what the seat posts were and everything like that. And on a wing and a prayer, I said, we're gonna get an S4, and we're not even gonna stand you over the bike. We're gonna walk out of the shop with the S4 having never even put her butt on that seat, okay? This is a drawing of the S4, okay? Now, from that drawing, we've got these red values. And anybody familiar with BikeCAD? These making value colorations is something that you'll be able to do in 18.5. It's about to be released, which is a very nice thing for communication, I think. And also, it wasn't ready by the time I made this. We were doing some prototype work in 18.5, but you'll be able to have a description under there of anything, like if you're a bike maker, or are you from 22? Yep. Okay, so if you're sending this to a client, you could write under that 603, like, we decided to make this longer, or whatever, and you could add a note, and you could really communicate using different colors what different things mean. So if we go back and we look at S3, we're going to look at this row, I'm sorry, S4. We're going to look at this row here at these values. And most of them like 333 millimeters of bottom bracket height, head tube angle 65. You know, some are common throughout the range and some are very specific. And you can see from there and the rest of the literature, we can figure out, well, we know there's 622 millimeter bead seat diameters on the rims. We know the fork length they're using and the fork travel. We know the offset and the head angle and front center, things like that. But that really left us in a bit of a bind because realistically, while they communicate to us, and I'm sorry, not N, but D, is it O or D? Oh, there, O, 76-degree seat tube angle. Well, what does that mean? I don't know what they really mean by the seat tube angle. Did they make it up? Is effective seat tube angle, is that what they mean? Because it doesn't look like it's drawn there. They're giving me an effective seat tube angle, not an actual seat tube angle. And if they gave us the actual seat tube angle, we'd need to know the offset from the bottom bracket as well. But we don't have either of those information. We've just got some theoretical 76 degrees for every bike in the range. That sounds fishy. If we look at 76 degrees right here. These purple values are the values in question, okay? I made them to stand out because we're going to be talking about these purple values in terms of they lie to us, okay? 76 degrees, if we extend it up the line, is a point coming from the seat tube where it would actually intersect the actual seat tube at 791 millimeters from the bottom bracket height. Guess what my seat height is? Got a good guess?
76.
No, 745. Okay? My seat height is 745 millimeters. Every one of these bikes, it says, is 76 degrees. Now, these are for big and small riders. And it might change with other variables, but the thing is that if every one of these bikes is describing the seat for 791, I couldn't even get on that bike. And that's the seat tube angle that they're claiming. Okay, now we're just going to go to another parameter just to kind of close in on this. And we'll look at, okay, you're a fitter and you know your bike, so you're going to go look at the effective top tube length. Great, that's awesome. No, it's not. We don't use that. In the real world, top tube length, effective top tube length, and stack and reach are not values you should ever be discussing when talking about bike fit or geometry. They're valueless. But it's part of the information that they give us. So let's look at that. Let's look at, where is it? Top tube length horizontal, 633 millimeters. Now, there's two ways of doing top tube length classically. There's the Taiwanese way, which is center of the top of the head tube horizontally across to the seat tube, or there's the contact of the top tube intersection with the head tube across. Okay, so it looks here like they're doing it the Taiwanese way, which is fine. Oh no, sorry. It looks here like they're going with the center of the top tube. If we look there, see this is the reach, and that's the effective top tube length, but it's not intersecting the top there. Okay, so they're doing it that method. Now, 633, I drew it in here because I had to measure that our offset here was 110, and in fact, all of the seat tubes are 68 degrees in reality. So it's an actual 68 and an actual 110, and so I could build that into my model. 633, that's great. Where's the point of intersection with the head tube axis? It's 385 millimeters below the head tube. It's essentially right about where my rim is. Now, is that a useful parameter? It's not even close to up there. That's where it should be, but in fact, it's right there. You know what's funny? In all the research I did on this bike, no one mentioned anywhere that that number is totally erroneous and doesn't reflect anything meaningful on the bike. Isn't that funny that nobody noticed? How many millions of these have they sold, do you think? A lot. Not one person anywhere has ever mentioned that. Okay, let's just take a look. If we were going to do it the Taiwanese method, it would be about 612. Now, if you're a fussy bike person and someone says, well, I wanted it 633, that's what I thought I was buying, but if you're going to sell me a 612, I don't want that, right? Because that's a big enough difference. 15 millimeters on the length of something. I mean, we know fussy types. They're gonna be like, no way, I'm 56 square, bro, or whatever. So we've got a problem in that these numbers aren't even close to each other. And in fact, if we want to go even deeper down this wormhole, earlier when we talked about 76 degrees and 791 height, if we were to do the intersection there to there, where the head tube would intersect, that would be 603 millimeters. So that 633 value is completely a joke, okay? Now, I drew this bike with the seat post that is supplied by specialists, Specialized, inserted the maximum value that it's able to be inserted, and they were nice about doing that. They said, where is it, maximum seat post max insertion. That's really good information. We'll talk more about seat posts. But that they supplied that, that's excellent. That they gave us the front center information, that's awesome. They should be encouraged for doing that. Most manufacturers don't, but they did, and that's great. But the thing is, they're giving us completely imaginary seat tube angles and top tube lengths for this bike. That's not cool. And nobody at Specialized figured that out? That's kind of weird too, isn't it? It's starting to sound like people that work at bike marketing divisions of companies actually don't know much about bikes. Might be true, right? So, but we've got our front center, that's the bottom bracket to front wheel, and that's actually the important value on a bike, okay? We're gonna talk more about that stuff. I should probably save that. But anyway, I just wanted to show you, I can take values that are given from literature, put them into BikeCAD. I can build a bike around it, and I'll smell a rat real quick, you know? In fact, I was gonna say, this seat tube height, I think we experimentally decided that on that one, it's 77.8 degree seat tube angle. Now, what's even crazier, in the current mountain bike market, all the kids chatting on Pink Bike, they see that number, 76 degree seat tube, and they say, no way, I'm not riding an old man mountain bike. That's some old time stuff. You know, I want something dope, right? If you put that number there, 77.8, they'd be like, that's the bike I want. That bike's hot. That bike's now, right? They actually could have put that number there, and it would have been true, and they would have sold more, right? But they put that number there that's entirely fictitious, and they're going to sell less bikes for it. Isn't that crazy? That's how you need to be, is I smell a rat and get to the bottom of it. Anyone have any questions about this? Oh, one thing is, like, they didn't tell me that they designed the geometry around 64 millimeter tires because they gave me the bottom bracket height and the drop and the chainstay length or whatever. I could calculate, because I knew the rim size diameter, what the height of the tire was. And so I build that into my thing, even though they didn't come out and say it. So you always want to do that if you're reverse engineering a geometry from their chart. They generally don't say, the geometry for this was designed for this size tire or something like that. They won't do that. Most don't even tell you what fork length they are. Here's another thing. Specialized is not exceptionally bad. They're actually fairly good. And one of the things they've done well here is they've told you what the fork length and offset is here. That's really cool. A lot of geometry prints don't tell you that information, what the designed front end stuff is. So we want to get that information, and Specialized has tried here. The problem is it seems that the people that work in their marketing department or their communications department don't have a lot of experience with bicycle chassis. And if you don't have a lot of experience with bicycle chassis, maybe doing marketing work for Specialized isn't the greatest place for you, right? Okay, anybody have any questions about this drawing of the Specialized Stumpjumper?
Yeah, and maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but what's the context to suspension segment?
What's that?
As far as like the bottom bracket height measurement, what's that in context to as far as like suspension?
Okay, generally, when you are reading geometry information for a full suspension bike, you're getting information for a topped out condition bike. So the bike is topped out, not sagged, is generally how it is done. There may be exceptions.
Yeah, I've seen both.
You have to keep your hackles up for that one. You don't know it till you know it, what they're doing. So you start filling in numbers, and if it starts not making sense, you start pushing even harder. These light blue numbers are values that I had to figure out, type of thing. I had to figure out that their drawing actually had a 1 millimeter lower headset stack, right? They didn't tell me that, but by filling things in, by using my knowledge and noticing, I go, okay, this is a 1 millimeter lower headset. I measured my wife's bike. It had a 3 millimeter top cap. which could be changed out. That's an easy thing to change. And the distance from the rear axle to the seat tube was 493 approximately. If I'm off a millimeter or whatever like that, it'll affect this offset. But it seemed like, you know, they have a nice round number for their actual seat tube. When I actually measure it, it's, 3 degrees different than the head tube angle. That's a nice way to do it. You can measure the seat tube, measure the head tube, measure the angular differences, and use that rather than their published utter BS information. I mean, most mountain bikes that have full suspension will have a bent seat tube, but for some reason they're not giving you the offset of that seat tube. Well, that's insane. Some are starting to do it now, but most don't. And that's really problematic because supposedly, according to fit guys and trainers and stuff, it actually matters where your saddle is. You know, we live in a world where everybody claims to be really up on their stuff and really fussy about their saddle position, but for some reason it hasn't bothered them at the least that they're not getting any information that would make it easy for them to predict where their saddle will end up from the manufacturers that are making the $12,000 bike they're going to buy. Are you crazy? So that's a tough thing to kind of just skip over, since that's one of the main things we're going to be doing, right? Okay, any other questions about this one? Because it's going to get harder from here. Okay.
Quickly run through where that 633 comes in again?
633, okay, yeah. So right over here, they say top tube length horizontal. And that's the non-Taiwanese method for measuring top tube length, where the top tube intersects the head tube, laid over from bad old days of horizontal top tubes and things like that. So right about there. And they give us a value of 633. Yep. Okay, so I drew where along the head tube axis that intersection point is. And if you, oh, sorry, there it is. Where along the head tube that, and you see, I'm sorry. Oh yeah, right there. Right there's the intersection. So we came down from the top of the head tube, 385 millimeters, and it's at that point that, and there's an extension line up to there because it's dropped down a little bit. It's kind of, we got a cloudy print here. But to right there is 633 millimeters. That's the information they gave us,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
So their top tube intersection information that they're communicating to the customers for the $10,000 build is at a point right about where my ERD is. Or my, sorry, actually not. Yeah, my ERD, not even my bead seat, right? So it's like, that's insane. You would have thought that I wouldn't be the first person to point that out, but I am. And this is not on an obscure bike. It's a Specialized Stumpjumper. It's actually a really awesome bike. I think it's a great bike. We bought it from my wife. I'm stoked on it. Anyway, any more questions? Okay. So this is the same frame, but what we've done is we've changed the fork. That came with a 140 fork. I happen to have a 150 fork laying around, so I swapped in the longer fork, and if you noticed, it changed the head tube angle by half a degree. It changed the seat tube angle by half a degree. Actually, on this print, now that I've added the saddle at the correct height and everything like that, this is the true effective seat tube angle on the bike. And for some reason, I don't have the actual drawn, but it would have changed. It would have gotten half a degree slacker, just like the head tube, because they rock the same. Okay, and I've got a 185 dropper. We put in a longer dropper because, I mean, I'm running a 240 dropper for mountain biking. She's got a 185. She's a little bit smaller than me. Probably one or more on a 200, but this is the max we could fit in there. And I've changed the stem, is like a Syntace Saber Tooth or Flat Force 55, and I've got a SQ Labs 12-degree back sweep bar that moves from the binder to the hand grip is 62 millimeters that way and 4 millimeters that way. We'll get more into that. What I wanted to show you this is another comparison. We're going to look at another one where we change the bars. So this is our initial setup of the bike, and she's riding around with this for a while. And if you notice in these yellow, these are a lot of the measurements that surround the hand grips. So when we're on a flat bar bike, I mean, all of this changes for drop bar bikes as variants, and I would love to see people that work with drop bar bikes more put some work into this, because there's a lot of need in that realm. But for flat bar bikes, I've done most of the work already. But all these yellow dimensions are describing something about that hand grip area. That's what we care about right there, the end of the grip. Now, theoretically, it would be better to be referencing a point maybe 2.5 inches in from the end of the grip, more reflective of what the hand is doing. But in practice and for expediency, using the end of the grip is actually just easier. It works well enough. That's kind of what we're doing. It also works well with bike CAD, because otherwise it would just turn into lunacy trying to predict that in 3D space and everything like that. So we use the end of the handlebar grip to measure, and these are the associated positions with that. And here you can see, let's use the value of right here. This is what we call the PVD rad thing. It's kind of a thing we discuss at length in another venue. But 821 millimeters from the bottom bracket to the center of the end of the grip at a 55.4 degree angle. Now, when we talk about performance fit or what you're trying to get out of your flat bar bike, that's really the operative number right there. That's telling us basically everything we want to know about the flat bar positioning. Now, we could use the XY values, the Y being 676 and the X value being, I think it's this 466 value here. It would have been nice if I could have written this stuff underneath like I wanted to, but we didn't get that ready in time. Anyway, we could use the XY, and that's fine. But the thing is, this is a radial measurement, kind of like how we're used to talking about the seat position at a distance and an angle. Hand grips work the same way. I mean, this is a radius around the pedals that we're working in. The bike doesn't care about the attitude of the bike, or you generally don't notice the attitude of the bike, but the thing is, you'll notice the radial position because you're coming off your feet to your hands. Where level to earth is doesn't really matter. If you've read Myth of Cops by Bontrager, that he talks a lot about that, but we're extending that to entirely new directions. Anyway, so that's the bike as configured, as it really rides with different tire. Oh, we've still got those tire values, just that left it consistent within that scheme. But we're going to change these values here because we're going to change the bars. So 12 degrees, 9 degree bars are sort of the commodity flat handlebars. And they're really great if you're doing bench presses. And they're kind of maybe left over from a bend when we had hand grips that were like this. 9 degree work well, but we've moved out to here. And now 9 degree can actually be very painful if you're not fully like pro enduro or downhill racing and you have to do a bench press like that. When we're doing general riding or something like that, I'm finding I'm using a 14 degree and I might want to go to a 16 degree or something like that. It's really nice, really comfortable. You don't know, you get a lot more relaxed hand position. I think a lot of people like get into like drop bars because there's more hand positions because their hands hurt on flat bars. It's like, you might be that you were trying a flat bar with like a 6 degree bend or a 9 degree bend and it just didn't work for you because it's like, you don't work that way. Try a 16 degree bend. And you might find that flat bars are better because there's much more control. Anyway, let's go to it. Okay, so we changed the bars. We moved from the 12 to the 16, and you notice these two values change right here. That's from the binder of the 55. And granted, a Syntace Sabertooth stem goes down to 44, and you might think you're outsmarting the system by setting up for a 44. I would suggest you don't. It's a beautiful stem and a real problem solver in a lot of environments, but the 44 kind of gets bound up, especially on carbon frames around the head tube area, and give yourself a little breathing room with the 55 is a favor you'll be doing to yourself. So that's why the 55 stayed 55, didn't go down to 44, is because it's just, you use that in emergencies. Like, if you're going to plan on it, use the 55.
You're not running any spaces, are you?
What's that?
You're not running any spaces, are you?
On this situation, no, because again, we spec the S4 for somebody that otherwise would have been spec'd for the S3, and we've increased the fork length. So by using, if anyone do you folks know the flat forest stem? It's incredible stem, and it gets us down and dirty, and that's good. So we're trying to build this value up a bit, kind of get it so she's really engaging her body when she climbs and rides. And what's nice about a modern mountain bike setup is by moving the front wheel out so far ahead, and we're going to get into this in a second, we can run fairly aggressive, what we call cross-country riding positions that really engage the riding and the muscles. And when you point downhill, you're not going to crash over the handlebars and die. So you actually get much better climbing on the enduro long front ends than you could otherwise attain with the short ones, because you can ride a position that you can engage the bike muscularly better and not die when you go down the trail on the downside. That's awesome, right? We've been talking about this for years. This is forward geometry 101. And I can talk at length about that. This is again, remember I talked about this spiraling cognition, where you got to learn some of this stuff before you can come back, and then we can start over again. So I'm trying to do 8 spirals with you all at once right here. So this is a difficult subject that I would much rather spend a semester talking about at a university. Okay, so we can see that between these two bikes, when I change the handlebars, all of these yellow values change. I changed one thing. I changed the handlebars. All of those values change. The riding the grip position. Remember, on mountain bikes, the saddle position generally doesn't matter, other than sitting going up the hill. Once you start pointing downhill, the saddle's just out of the way. So we're most concerned about where the hand grips are. But if you notice, 56.5 degree angle from 55.4, by going to that different handlebar, we've actually gotten her a little bit more upright on the bike. I was worried she was a little bit too forward and down on the bike, and I wanted to move her back. I've painted myself in a corner by shoehorning her into this big bike for performance reasons. I wanted her in here. I ride an 850 front center. I'm 5'10". And if you were just doing a straight up proportional math across that for 5'6", it comes out to 800 millimeters. So when I'm talking about what works good for me, if we're just being fast and loose, 850 for me, 800 for her. That's one of the things we wanted with this bike. We wanted to get her a dope bike, not some piece of junk some 14-year-old sold us off the floor, right? So we were a little aggressive with that first handlebar, and by going to the 16 degree, we actually got her a little bit more upright, a little bit more comfortable, and it's going to be a little nicer and relaxed on traverses, and it's also going to feel a little bit better going downhill. Isn't that cool? Just by changing one part. And that was a predictive change. I knew it was going to be further back. Granted, handlebar manufacturers know far less about bicycles, I think, than almost any other manufacturer. If you look at the way they describe the geometry of their handlebars, it absolutely makes sense, no sense, is nonsense, and doesn't tell you anything about the handlebars. It's really bad. Anytime anyone says upsweep, you know they don't know anything about handlebars. Absolutely. It's a zero value term that means they don't know what they're talking about. That's what upsweep means. So I'm giving you the X and the Y, how high off that is, how much further back. Then we can get into 3D stuff. We're going to talk more about that, okay? Anyone have any questions about this example that we just had with the Stumpjumper? Because we're going to move on. It's going to get a little bit more nebulous now.
I could just say that,